I decided to visit my son-in-law without calling, intending to surprise him with the investment news he had been begging for. But when I pulled into his driveway and saw my wife's silver Mercedes parked behind a row of overgrown cedar trees, a cold shiver ran down my spine. I quietly stepped out of my truck and crept toward the open living room window. I expected to catch them in a lie about money. I never expected to hear them planning my murder. My name is Harrison Vance. I am 72 years old, and until 45 minutes ago, I thought I was a respected patriarch, a loving husband, and a supportive father. I spent 40 years building skyscrapers across Boston, dealing with corrupt unions and cutthroat developers. Yet I never realized the most dangerous snakes were sleeping in my own guest bedrooms. Before I tell you how I dismantled their lives piece by piece, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect your legacy from the very people who were supposed to inherit it. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of crisp autumn day that usually makes you glad to be alive. I was driving my Ford F-150, the same beat-up truck I have driven for 15 years. My wife Patricia always hated it. She said a man with $18 million in assets should be driven in a Bentley, or at least a new Cadillac. But I liked the truck. It reminded me of where I came from. It reminded me of the days when I mixed concrete with my own hands before I ever drew a blueprint. I was heading to the house I bought for my daughter Emily and her husband Jason. It is a beautiful colonial in Wellesley worth $2.5 million. I paid cash for it as a wedding gift 3 years ago. Jason had called me the night before, desperate. He gave me some story about a bridge loan for his investment firm falling through. He needed $500,000 by Wednesday, or he would lose a massive opportunity. I am not a fool with money, but for family. I have a blind spot. I had the check in my pocket. I wanted to look him in the eye when I gave it to him, to make sure he understood this was a loan, not a gift. I turned onto their street. It was quiet. Most people were at work. As I steered the truck toward the long driveway, something caught my eye. To the left of the garage, there is a dense patch of cedar trees. It is a blind spot from the road, but the sun glinted off something metallic. I squinted. It was a bumper, a silver bumper. I stopped the truck halfway up the drive and killed the engine. I knew that car. It was the 2024 Mercedes S-Class I bought Patricia for her 60th birthday just last month. My heart started thumping a strange, irregular rhythm against my ribs. Patricia had told me this morning, while kissing my cheek, that she was spending the entire day at a holistic spa in Connecticut. She said she would not be back until late. Why was she here? And why was the car parked on the grass behind the trees instead of in the paved driveway? I stepped out of the truck. My boots crunched softly on the gravel, so I moved to the grass. I have walked active construction sites for decades. I know how to move without making a sound. As I got closer, I saw the license plate. It was caked in mud. Fresh mud. It hadn't rained in 3 days. Someone had deliberately smeared dirt over the plate to make it unreadable from a distance. A heavy stone settled in my stomach. Infidelity was the first thought naturally. Patricia is 12 years younger than me. Jason is 35. The math was sickening, but it was possible. I felt a wave of nausea, but I forced myself to keep moving. I needed to know. I needed to see. The living room window was cracked open about 4 inches to let in the breeze. I pressed my back against the siding of the house right next to the window frame. I could smell the expensive cologne Jason wears. Something I paid for, no doubt. I heard the clinking of glass, champagne flutes. Then I heard Patricia's voice. It wasn't the sweet, caring tone she used when she reminded me to take my heart medication. It was sharp, mocking, and full of ice. She said, "He actually believed the story about the spa. The old fool didn't even blink. He just asked if I had enough cash for tips. It is pathetic, Jason. He is like a dog that keeps coming back to the hand that beats it, except he doesn't even know he is being beaten." I held my breath. My hands clenched into fists so tight my knuckles turned white. Jason laughed. It was a cruel, arrogant sound. "Don't worry, Patty. We just need to keep the act up for another week. Once Emily drops the kid, she will be too exhausted to notice anything. I have already talked to Dr. Aris." My ears perked up. Dr. Aris was a psychiatrist Jason played golf with. Jason continued, his voice dropping lower but still clear in the quiet afternoon air. "I have been spiking his evening scotch with the haloperidol for 3 weeks now. Haven't you noticed his hands shaking? He dropped his fork twice at dinner on Sunday." I froze. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling now, but not from fear, from rage. I had noticed the tremors. I had been terrified I was developing Parkinson's just like my father. I had even scheduled a neurology appointment for next week. They were drugging me. Patricia giggled. It sounded demonic. "Oh," I noticed. I told him he looked pale. I told him he was forgetting things he never actually said. "It is called gaslighting, darling, and it is working perfectly. By the time the baby is born, we will have enough documented incidents to file for emergency guardianship. We will declare him mentally incompetent." And then Jason asked, the sound of liquid pouring into a glass filling the silence. Then Patricia said, her voice dropping to a whisper that cut through me like a rusted saw blade, "We put him in that facility up north, the one with the lockdown unit. And if his heart condition just happens to worsen, well, who is going to question a grieving widow and a devoted son-in-law?" Jason toasted. "To the richest widow in Boston. And to me, the new CEO of Vance Holdings." I felt like I had been punched in the gut by a wrecking ball. The air left my lungs, my vision blurred. For a second, I thought I was going to have a heart attack right there in the flower bed. They weren't just sleeping together. That would have been a mercy compared to this. They were methodically, chemically dismantling my mind so they could steal my life and then end it. I realized then that the check in my pocket, the $500,000, was just a drop in the bucket. They wanted it all. The 18 million, the properties, the control. And they were willing to turn my daughter into a fatherless single mother to get it. My foot slipped on a patch of mulch. I stumbled, my shoulder hitting the vinyl siding with a dull thud. Inside, the laughter stopped instantly. "Did you hear that?" Jason asked. I held my breath, pressing myself flat against the wall, praying my old heart wouldn't beat loud enough to give me away. Probably just a squirrel, Patricia dismissed it. Or maybe the wind. "Relax, Jason. Harrison is probably napping in his recliner right now, dreaming about the good old days. He is harmless. He is a relic. A relic." I slowly exhaled. I didn't storm in. I didn't scream. The Harrison Vance of 30 years ago, the man who once threw a foreman off a job site for stealing copper wire, would have kicked down the door and beaten Jason to a pulp. But that man would have gone to jail. That man would have lost. The Harrison Vance standing outside that window today was different. I was an architect. I knew that if you want to bring down a building, you don't swing a sledgehammer at the walls. You find the structural weakness in the foundation, and you plant explosives where no one can see them until the dust clears. I carefully, agonizingly, slowly retraced my steps. I walked backward across the grass until I reached the gravel. I opened the truck door, holding the handle so it wouldn't click. I pushed the truck into neutral and let it roll down the driveway, gravity doing the work, until I was 50 yards down the street. Only then did I turn the key. As the engine roared to life, I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw the house I had bought with my sweat and blood. It looked the same as it did an hour ago, stately, welcoming, pristine. But now I knew it was a nest of vipers. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My face was pale. My eyes were red-rimmed. But the shaking in my hands had stopped. A cold calm had washed over me. It was the calm of a man who has nothing left to lose and everything to avenge. Patricia thought I was a relic. Jason thought I was a clueless old man ready for the slaughterhouse. They thought they were writing the final chapter of my life. I put the truck in gear and pulled away, leaving the check for $500,000 untouched in my pocket. They were wrong. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of theirs, and it was going to be a tragedy. I drove straight to the only place I knew was safe. Not the police station. Not my home. I drove to the bank. If they wanted a war over assets, I would show them what a hostile takeover really looked like. But first, I needed to know exactly how much poison was in my blood. I needed proof, because when I strike, I don't miss. The house was dark when I finally pulled into the garage, but the silence that usually brought me peace now felt heavy like the air before a thunderstorm. I walked into the kitchen, the granite countertops gleaming under the under-cabinet lighting I had installed myself just last year. Every corner of this house held a memory, a decision, a moment of pride. Now it just felt like a stage set for a tragedy I was being forced to star in. I poured myself a glass of water, my hand steady despite the rage boiling in my veins. I didn't turn on the main lights. I just sat at the kitchen island and waited. At 7:30 sharp, the garage door rumbled open. I heard the distinct purr of the Mercedes engine, then the heavy thud of the door closing. Footsteps clicked against the concrete. Then the mudroom door swung open. Patricia breezed in, bringing with her a gust of cool autumn air and the overpowering scent of lavender and eucalyptus. She was carrying 3 boutique shopping bags with the logo of an exclusive spa in Connecticut. It was the perfect prop. "Harrison, darling, why are you sitting in the dark?" she asked, her voice light and musical. She flipped the switch, flooding the room with harsh light. I blinked, forcing a confused expression onto my face. I had to play the part. I had to be the befuddled old man she wanted me to be. I must have dozed off, I muttered, rubbing my eyes. "How was the spa?" "Oh, it was heavenly," she sighed, setting the bags on the counter and walking over to kiss my cheek. Her lips felt like ice burning my skin. I had to use every ounce of willpower not to recoil, not to grab her by the shoulders and demand to know why she smelled like Jason's cologne beneath the lavender. The mud wrap was exactly what I needed, and the traffic coming back was a nightmare on I-95. I was so worried I would miss dinner. I looked at her. Really looked at her. For 10 years, I thought I saw a partner. Now I saw a predator. Her makeup was flawless, hiding the wrinkles she hated so much. Her smile was practiced. She was putting on a performance worthy of Broadway, and I was the only audience member who knew the script was fake. "You look refreshed," I said, my voice dry. She bustled around the kitchen, filling a kettle for tea. "Did you have a good day? Did you manage to fix that leaky faucet in the guest bath?" "I didn't fix the faucet. I drove to the bank. I drove to a private investigator's office. But I couldn't say that. I tried to call Jason earlier," I said, dropping the bait. I kept my eyes fixed on the rim of my water glass. I wanted to talk to him about that investment he mentioned. But he didn't pick up. I thought maybe I would drive over, but I forgot where I put my keys. There was a pause. It was less than a second, a tiny hitch in her movement, as she reached for a tea bag. If I hadn't been looking for it, I would have missed it. But I saw her shoulders stiffen. "Oh, don't worry about that," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "I spoke to Emily earlier. She said Jason was in meetings with those investors from New York all day. He probably had his phone off. You know how intense those finance types can be." The lie rolled off her tongue so easily. Meetings. Investors. She had been in his bed 2 hours ago. She had been laughing while he planned my death. The realization that she could look me in the eye and lie with such ease was more painful than the infidelity itself. It meant that every "I love you," every concern for my health over the last few months had likely been a lie too. "Well, that explains it," I said, tapping my fingers on the counter. "My memory seems to be getting worse, Patty. I could have sworn he said he was free today." Patricia turned to me, her face arranging itself into a mask of deep concern. She walked over and placed her hand on my arm. "Harrison, we have talked about this. You are under a lot of stress. Dr. Eris said confusion is a side effect of high blood pressure, but we need to be careful. You are mixing up dates and conversations more frequently." She was planting the seeds, making me doubt my own reality. If I hadn't heard the truth with my own ears, I might have believed her. I might have actually thought I was losing my mind. She went to the cabinet where we kept the medications. "It is time for your evening supplements," she said efficiently. "You know what the doctor said. Routine is key." She brought over a small ceramic dish with 3 pills. 2 were my standard blood pressure medication and a cholesterol pill. I recognized them. But the third one, a small pale yellow tablet, was supposed to be a new multivitamin she had started me on 3 weeks ago. She claimed it was for brain health, imported from Switzerland. "Here you go," she said, handing me the glass of water. I took the dish. My hand trembled this time, not from acting, but from the sheer horror of what I was holding. Jason had said haloperidol, an antipsychotic. Used to treat schizophrenia, but in healthy older adults it causes tremors, confusion, lethargy, and memory loss. It mimics dementia perfectly. I looked at the yellow pill. It looked innocent. I put all 3 pills in my mouth. Patricia watched me. Her eyes were locked on my throat. She needed to see me swallow. She needed to see the poison go down. I took a large gulp of water. I swallowed the 2 legitimate medications, but with a practiced maneuver I had learned from hiding tobacco as a teenager, I slid the yellow pill between my gum and my cheek. "All down?" she asked, smiling. "All down," I said. "Good. Now why don't you go sit in the living room and watch the news? I will start a light dinner. You look exhausted, Harrison." I nodded and shuffled out of the kitchen, playing the part of the tired, obedient husband. As soon as I was out of her line of sight, I moved quickly to the den. I sat on the leather sofa and pretended to fumble for the remote. I coughed into my hand, spitting the yellow pill into my palm. It was already starting to dissolve slightly. I touched it with the tip of my tongue. The taste was vile, bitter, metallic chemical. It didn't taste like any vitamin I had ever taken. It tasted like death. I wiped the residue on my handkerchief and looked around the room. I couldn't flush it. She might hear the toilet. I couldn't throw it in the trash. She was meticulous about sorting the garbage. I reached down into the gap between the seat cushion and the arm of the sofa. My fingers brushed against old crumbs and lost coins until I found a small tear in the lining fabric. I pushed the pill deep inside the tear, burying it in the foam stuffing. I sat back up, my heart pounding against my ribs. I wasn't losing my mind. I was being murdered by inches. Every tremor in my hand, every moment of fog I had felt in the last 3 weeks wasn't age. It was them. They were chemically lobotomizing me in my own home. I looked toward the kitchen where the sounds of chopping vegetables and humming drifted out. Patricia was humming a tune. She was happy. She thought the plan was working. She thought the old man was fading away day by day, pill by pill. I gripped the armrest of the sofa. The anger that had been a hot fire in my chest cooled down into something harder, sharper. I wasn't going to just survive this. I was going to turn their weapon against them. Tomorrow I wouldn't just be visiting the bank. I would be visiting a lab. I needed to know exactly what was in that pill. I needed the toxicology report, because in a court of law my word against theirs might fail. But science doesn't lie. I turned on the television, the volume low. I sat there in the flickering light, listening to my wife cook dinner, knowing that every plate she served me from now on was a potential death sentence. But I would eat. I would smile. I would take the pills and hide them. I would play the game better than they ever could. Because now I knew the rules, and I knew that in this game the loser doesn't just lose money, the loser loses everything. Sunday arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum, casting a gray pallor over the dining room that matched the feeling in my gut. This was the weekly ritual, the Sunday family dinner that used to be the highlight of my week. Now, as I adjusted the cuffs of my shirt and checked my reflection in the hallway mirror, I felt like a soldier preparing to walk into a minefield without a metal detector. I had spent the last few days pretending to take the pills, pretending to be confused, and watching Patricia watch me with that hawk-like intensity she disguised as affection. But tonight was different. Tonight, I would see my daughter. When the doorbell rang, the sound seemed to echo too loudly in the silence of the house. Patricia rushed to answer it, her heels clicking on the hardwood, putting on her best performance of the doting grandmother-to-be. I followed slowly, adopting the slightly shuffled gait I had been perfecting all week. I needed them to believe the poison was working. I needed them to think the lion had lost his teeth. But when the door opened, my act almost crumbled. Jason walked in first, radiating a sickening kind of vitality. He was wearing a crisp white Oxford shirt and navy chinos, looking every inch the successful son-in-law he pretended to be. He flashed that bright, predatory smile at Patricia and leaned in to kiss her cheek, lingering just a fraction of a second too long for propriety. But I didn't care about Jason. My eyes went straight to the person behind him. Emily. My beautiful, vibrant daughter, who used to run marathons and debate politics with me until 2 a.m, looked like a walking corpse. She was 7 months pregnant, but instead of the glow everyone talks about, her skin was the color of parchment. Her eyes, usually a sharp, intelligent hazel, were dull and glassy, surrounded by dark circles that looked like bruises. She didn't walk. She shuffled, her movements heavy and uncoordinated. "Hi, Dad," she whispered. Her voice was thin, brittle. I wanted to rush forward and wrap her in my arms. I wanted to shake Jason until his teeth rattled and demand to know what he had done to her. But I couldn't. Not yet. If I broke character now, we would both lose. "Hello, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice steady, but injecting a note of frailty into it. "You look tired." Jason stepped between us, placing a possessive hand on the small of her back. He squeezed, and I saw Emily flinch. "She is just exhausted, Harrison," Jason said, his voice loud and condescending. "The doctor said the 3rd trimester is tough. Plus her hormones are all over the place. She has been having some pretty severe mood swings, haven't you, Emily didn't answer. She just stared at the floor and nodded mechanically. We moved to the dining room. The table was set with Patricia's best china, the silver gleaming under the chandelier. It was a grotesque tableau of domestic perfection. Patricia sat at the foot of the table. I took the head, and Jason and Emily sat on either side. Dinner was a roast, but to me, it tasted like sawdust. The conversation was led entirely by Jason and Patricia, who bounced topics back and forth like a tennis ball, purposefully excluding Emily and treating me like a child. So Harrison, Jason said, cutting into a piece of meat with surgical precision. "Patricia tells me you lost your keys again yesterday. That is the 3rd time this month, isn't it?" I gripped my fork. I hadn't lost my keys. Patricia had hidden them in the freezer, and then magically found them later. "I suppose so," I muttered. "My mind isn't what it used to be." Jason smirked and took a sip of his wine. "You really should be more careful. We wouldn't want you wandering off and getting lost. It is becoming a safety issue." I decided to test the waters. I cleared my throat and looked at Emily, desperate to make a connection. "You know, Emily, being here reminds me of the time we went to Cape Cod when you were 10. Do you remember? We built that massive sandcastle and you insisted on digging a moat that reached the ocean. You were so determined. You stood there for hours with your little yellow bucket." I saw a flicker of something in Emily's eyes. A spark of memory. A tiny bit of the old Emily trying to break through the fog. "I remember," she said softly. "The tide came in and—" "Dad, stop!" Jason interrupted, slamming his glass down on the table. The noise made Emily jump. She shrank back into her chair. What? I asked, feigning confusion. You have told us that story 3 times already since we sat down, Jason said, shaking his head with exaggerated exasperation. It is getting painful to watch. I stared at him. I had not told that story. I had barely spoken 10 words since the appetizers. I did, I stammered, looking at Patricia. Patricia reached out and patted my hand, her face a mask of pity that made my stomach turn. Yes, darling. You told us about the sandcastle right before the salad, and then again when I brought out the roast. It is okay. We know you don't mean to repeat yourself. I looked at Emily. She was looking at me with a mixture of fear and confusion. The spark in her eyes was gone, replaced by the dull acceptance of a lie. She believed them. They had gaslighted her so thoroughly that she couldn't trust her own memory of the last 20 minutes. I am sorry, I whispered, looking down at my plate. I didn't realize. It is okay, Dad, Emily said, her voice trembling. Maybe you should see that specialist Jason talked about. Hearing my own daughter suggest I was losing my mind was a dagger to the heart. But I noticed something else. Next to Emily's plate was a tall glass of freshly squeezed orange juice. It was the only non-alcoholic drink on the table. Patricia had made a big show of pouring it for her earlier. Drink up, Jason said, noticing my gaze. You need the vitamin C. Doctor Aris was very specific about your nutrition. Dr. Aris, the psychiatrist, the man who was helping them poison me. If he was involved in Emily's nutrition, that juice was as toxic as the pills in my sofa. I am not thirsty, Emily murmured. Drink it, Jason said. His voice dropped an octave. It wasn't a suggestion anymore. It was an order. For the baby. Emily's hand reached for the glass. Her fingers were shaking. I couldn't let her drink it. I didn't know what was in it, sedatives, hallucinogens, or something worse, but I knew I had to stop it. I needed a distraction. A big one. I reached for the bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon to refill my glass. As my hand passed over Jason's side of the table, I deliberately allowed my arm to spasm. It was a violent, jerky movement, exactly like the side effect of the drug they thought I was taking. My hand struck Jason's wine glass. The goblet tipped over, sending a tidal wave of dark red liquid cascading onto Jason's pristine white shirt and lap. Damn it, Jason yelled, jumping up and knocking his chair back. You clumsy old fool! Look what you did! Chaos erupted. Patricia gasped and jumped up, grabbing napkins. Oh, Harrison. Be careful. I am so sorry, I stammered, standing up and moving around the table towards them, acting flustered. My hand. It just slipped. Jason was busy wiping his pants, swearing under his breath, his charming mask completely gone. Patricia was fussing over him. No one was looking at Emily. This was my chance. I grabbed a napkin and moved to Emily's side, pretending to check if any wine had splashed on her. I leaned in close, my face inches from her ear, sheltered from the others by the high back of her chair. I dropped the act. My voice was low, sharp, and lucid. Do not drink the orange juice, I whispered. It is drugged. They are lying to you, Emily. I am not sick. Trust me. I pulled back instantly, terrified I had been too bold. Emily turned her head slowly to look at me. I waited for a nod, a squeeze of the hand, a sign that she understood. But what I saw froze my blood. She looked at me with absolute terror. She didn't see a father trying to save her. She saw a delusional old man whispering conspiracy theories. She saw the person Jason had warned her about. Dad. She whispered, her voice trembling with tears. You are scaring me. Please stop. Jason looked up, and his face red with anger. What did you say to her, Uthing? I said, raising my hands in surrender, stepping back into the role of the confused senior. I just... I didn't want the wine to ruin her dress. Jason glared at me, then looked at Emily. He walked over, placed a hand on her shoulder, and pushed the glass of orange juice closer to her. "It is okay, babe," he said, his eyes locking onto mine with a cold challenge. "Your dad is just having a bad night. Drink your juice, it will help you calm down." Emily looked at me one last time, tears spilling down her cheeks. Then she looked at Jason. The fear in her eyes shifted to submission. She picked up the glass. "Don't," I thought, screaming inside my head. "Please, baby girl, don't." She brought the glass to her lips and drank. She drank it all, gulping it down like it was medicine she hated, but knew she had to take. Jason smiled at me. It was the smile of a man who knew he had won. I sank back into my chair, watching my daughter swallow the poison that kept her compliant. I felt a cold rage settle in the pit of my stomach, heavier and darker than anything I had ever felt before. They had taken her mind. They had turned her against me. Spilling the wine wasn't enough. Whispering wasn't enough. I realized then that I couldn't save Emily with subtle gestures. I couldn't wake her up with words. She was too far gone. If I wanted to save my daughter and my grandchild, I was going to have to destroy the world she was living in. I was going to have to let them think they had succeeded, let them drag us all the way to the edge of the cliff. Because only when they were standing on the edge, arrogant and blinded by their own victory, could I push them off. I picked up my fork and resumed eating the cold roast. "That was delicious, Patricia," I said, my voice hollow. "Thank you, Harrison," she replied, exchanging a look with Jason. I chewed slowly, visualizing the blueprints in my head. Not for a building, but for a cage. A cage built of laws, money, and evidence. And tonight, Jason just gave me the measurements I needed. He thought the wine stain on his shirt was a disaster. He had no idea it was the mark of a dead man walking. The rain on Monday morning matched my mood perfectly, a relentless gray drizzle that washed the color out of the Boston streets. I told Patricia I was going to the library to read old newspapers, a habit she encouraged because she thought it was a harmless pastime for a senile man. In reality, I drove straight to the financial district. I parked my truck 3 blocks away from the First Republic private wealth office, pulled up my collar, and walked briskly. My hands were in my pockets, gripping the cold metal of my car keys, grounding me in the present. I wasn't the confused old man who spilled wine at dinner last night. Today, I was Harrison Vance, the man who had built half the skyline of this city, and I was about to inspect the foundation of my own life. I walked through the revolving glass doors and was immediately greeted by the hushed, sterile atmosphere of wealth. The air smelled of polished mahogany and money. My account manager, Robert, a man I had known for 20 years, hurried over to greet me. Usually Robert greeted me with a firm handshake and a joke about the Red Sox. Today he looked at me with eyes full of concern, the kind of pity usually reserved for stray dogs or terminally ill patients. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice lowered to a conspiratorial whisper. "I didn't expect to see you today. Is everything all right?" I looked him dead in the eye. "I don't know, Robert. You tell me." I asked to be taken to the private viewing room. Once the heavy oak door clicked shut, sealing us off from the world, I dropped the act. I sat straight, my gaze sharp. "Show me the activity, Robert," I commanded. "And don't give me the summary. I want the raw transaction logs for the last 30 days. Robert hesitated, shifting uncomfortably in his expensive suit. "Harrison, look. We were going to call you. There was an irregularity on Friday afternoon." He slid a file across the polished table. I opened it. On top was a transfer request form. My eyes scanned the numbers. $2 million. Destination: a shell company account in the Cayman Islands. I looked at the signature at the bottom. It was my name. The loops of the H and the sharp angle of the V were almost perfect. Almost. To anyone else, it looked authentic. But I knew my own hand. I knew that when I signed my name, I always lifted the pen slightly on the letter N. This signature flowed without a break. It was a forgery. A masterpiece of a forgery, likely practiced 1,000 times, but a forgery nonetheless. Beneath my signature was the counter-signature required for any transfer over $50,000. Jason Bennett, my son-in-law. It didn't go through, Robert said quickly, seeing the vein in my temple pulse. Our automated fraud detection system flagged it. Not because of the signature, actually. That passed the visual check. It was flagged because the receiving account in the Caymans is on a watch list. It is associated with high-risk gambling syndicates. I felt the air leave the room. Gambling. I sat back, the leather chair creaking under my weight. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with the force of a pile driver. Jason wasn't just a bad investor. He wasn't just greedy. He was a degenerate gambler. Dig deeper, Robert, I said, my voice like gravel. Run a full liability check on Jason Bennett. Use my authority as the primary account holder of the family trust. I want to know who he owes. Robert typed furiously on his terminal for a few minutes. The silence stretched heavy and suffocating. When he finally looked up, his face was pale. Harrison, he said softly. It is bad. We have inquiries on his credit report from 3 different collection agencies in New Jersey. Hard inquiries. But that is not the worst part. There are shadow liens against his house. The house you bought them. And there is a flag here from a private lender in South Boston. South Boston. That didn't mean banks. That meant loan sharks. That meant men who broke legs for interest payments. How much, I asked. Robert swallowed hard. Based on the liens and the attempted transfer amount, I would estimate he is underwater by at least $5 million. $5 million. I closed my eyes. The desperation in Jason's eyes last night, the way he forced Emily to drink the juice, the urgency of their plan to declare me incompetent. It all made terrifying sense. They didn't just want my money to live a life of luxury. They needed my money to stay alive. Jason was drowning, and he had decided that the only life preserver big enough to save him was my entire estate. He was willing to kill me and drug his own wife to pay off a gambling debt. If he doesn't pay, I whispered more to myself than to Robert. They will kill him. Robert nodded grimly. And if the house is collateral, they might come for Emily too. That thought turned my blood to ice. Emily. My daughter. She was living in a house that effectively belonged to the mob, married to a man who had sold her safety to cover his losses. I stood up. The shock was gone, replaced by a cold, tactical fury. I needed to move fast. I needed to secure the perimeter. Robert, I said, leaning over the table, listen to me very carefully. You are going to freeze that transfer request, but you are not going to cancel it. You are going to leave it in system processing status. If Jason calls, tell him it is a bank software glitch, and it will clear in 48 hours. Buy me time. But Harrison, Robert stammered. That is highly irregular. Do it, I snapped, or I will move every cent I have to Chase Manhattan by noon. Robert nodded, terrified. I will handle it. Now I continued. I need cash, untraceable bills, $50,000. Robert didn't ask why. He simply made the call. 10 minutes later, I walked out of the bank with a heavy canvas envelope tucked inside my coat. The weight of it pressed against my ribs, a reminder that in this world, money was ammunition. I didn't go home. I drove to a nondescript office building in the industrial district, sandwiched between an auto body shop and a defunct printing press. I climbed the stairs to the second floor and knocked on a door with frosted glass that simply read, Miller Investigations. Miller was an ex-cop I had used years ago to check out contractors. He was cynical, expensive, and discreet. He looked up from his desk as I walked in, his eyes narrowing at the envelope in my hand. "I need a job done, Miller," I said, throwing the envelope onto his desk. The cash made a solid thud. "And I need it done today." "Who is the target?" Miller asked, reaching for the envelope. "I am," I said. He paused, his hand hovering over the money. "Excuse me, I need you to bug my house," I explained, my voice steady. "Every room, especially the kitchen and the master bedroom. Audio and video, high definition. And I need a remote feed accessible only from my phone. I want to know when a pin drops in that house." Miller opened the envelope and thumbed through the stack of hundreds. He whistled low. "Domestic trouble." "You could say that," I replied. "My wife and son-in-law are planning to commit me. I need them on tape. I need everything." Miller nodded, tucking the money into a drawer. "I can have a crew there in an hour. We will look like a pest control company. Tent the place for termites." "No," I said. "They will be suspicious. Make it a cable company." Patricia called about the internet being slow last week. "Show up, say you are upgrading the fiber optics. She will let you in. She loves anything that sounds like an upgrade." "Done," Miller said. "You want us to bug the daughter's house too?" "No," I said quickly. "Too risky. Jason is paranoid. Just my house, they feel safe there. They talk freely there. That is where they will hang themselves." I left Miller's office and got back into my truck. The rain was coming down harder now, drumming a chaotic rhythm on the roof. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I had confirmed the motive. I had funded the surveillance. Now I had to go back into the lion's den. I had to go home, sit on that sofa, take their poison pills, and wait for them to say the words that would send them to prison for the rest of their lives. I checked my watch. It was noon. Jason would be calling the bank soon, screaming about the delay. He would be panicked. And a panicked man makes mistakes. I started the engine. I was coming for them. And they wouldn't hear me until the trap snapped shut. I sat in the sterile, white-walled examination room of a private toxicology lab in downtown Boston, tapping my foot against the linoleum floor. The fluorescent lights hummed with a low, irritating buzz that seemed to drill directly into my skull. In my pocket, inside a small plastic bag, was the yellow pill I had salvaged from the sofa cushion. To anyone else, it looked like a harmless vitamin, a symbol of a wife's care for her aging husband. To me, it felt like a bullet I had managed to dodge, and I was terrified of what the ballistics report would say. Dr. Evans, a toxicologist I had hired based on a recommendation from my lawyer, walked in holding a clipboard. He didn't smile. He didn't offer the usual pleasantries about the weather or the Red Sox. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses with a gravity that made the air in the room grow heavy. "Mr. Vance," he said, closing the door firmly behind him. "We ran the mass spectrometry on the sample you provided. You were right to be suspicious. This is not a multivitamin. It isn't a supplement from Switzerland, and it certainly isn't for brain health." I gripped the armrests of the chair, bracing myself. "What is it, doctor?" "It is haloperidol," he said, the words hanging in the air like smoke. "And not a standard dose. This is a high-potency concentration typically used for acute psychiatric wards to sedate violent patients." I felt the blood drain from my face. Haloperidol. I knew the name, but hearing it confirmed was like a physical blow. "What does it do?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Dr. Evans pulled up a chart on his tablet and turned it towards me. "In a healthy 72-year-old man with no history of psychosis, this drug is a wrecking ball. The side effects include severe motor tremors, muscle rigidity, lethargy, and mental confusion. It causes what we call drug-induced Parkinsonism. But the psychological effects are worse. It creates a fog. You would lose your short-term memory. You would have trouble forming sentences. You would become docile, easily manipulated, and eventually you would exhibit symptoms indistinguishable from advanced dementia." I stared at the floor. My hands were shaking again, but this time it was pure rage. The tremors I had felt over the last 3 weeks, the times I had dropped my fork, the moments I couldn't remember where I put my glasses, it wasn't age. It wasn't my body failing me. It was Patricia. Every night she had kissed my cheek, handed me a glass of water, and poisoned me. She was chemically stripping away my dignity, my mind, and my autonomy, all while smiling and calling me darling. If I had kept taking these, I whispered, my voice raspy. What would have happened? Dr. Evans took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. If you had continued at this dosage for another month, the neurological damage could have been permanent. You would have been catatonic. You would have been exactly where they wanted you, in a long-term care facility, unable to speak, unable to object to a power of attorney transfer. Mr. Vance, this is not just malpractice. This is attempted murder by pharmaceutical means. I took the report from his hand. The paper felt heavy, like a death warrant I had miraculously survived. Thank you, doctor, I said, standing up. My legs felt strong. My mind was clear. I needed this. I walked out of the clinic and into the cold drizzle of the parking lot. I climbed into my truck, tossed the report onto the passenger seat, and just sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive straight home and tear the house down brick by brick. But I couldn't. Not yet. I had the medical proof, but I needed to know the full extent of the rot. My phone buzzed in my pocket, vibrating against my leg like a warning. It was a notification from the app connected to the listening devices Miller had installed yesterday. Motion detected. Living room, I frowned. Patricia was supposed to be at a charity luncheon. I unlocked my phone, opened the app, and put on my earbuds. The audio feed crackled to life, crystal clear. At first I heard sobbing, a low, wretched sound that twisted my gut. It was Emily. Then I heard Jason's voice. It was smooth, cold, and utterly devoid of humanity. Stop crying, Emily. It is pathetic. You are stressing the baby, and if you stress the baby, you are stressing me. I can't do it. Jason, Emily sobbed. I can't sign this. You are asking me to give up my rights. You are asking me to let you make all the decisions for the baby. Why we are married. Why do we need a contract? I leaned closer to the phone, my heart hammering against my ribs. Because Emily, Jason said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. We have to be realistic. Look at your father. Look at him. He is losing his mind. He is violent. He is unpredictable. He is not violent, Emily cried out. He spilled some wine. He is just old. He is crazy. Emily, Jason shouted, the volume spiking in my ear. And you know what the doctors say, it is genetic. It runs in the blood. You have been emotional lately. You have been seeing things. You have been paranoid. Just like him. No, Emily whimpered. No, I am fine. Are you? Jason sneered. You forgot to turn off the oven yesterday. You lost your car keys twice last week. Does that sound familiar? It starts with forgetfulness. Emily. Then comes the confusion. Then the madness. If you don't sign this paper giving me full guardianship of the child in case of your incapacity, then I will have no choice. No choice but what Emily asked, her voice trembling with terror. To have you evaluated, Jason said calmly, just like we are doing with your dad. If you are unfit, Emily, I will put you in the same facility as him. I will take the baby, and you will rot in a padded room next to your crazy father. Is that what you want? Do you want your son to grow up visiting his mother in a lunatic asylum? Silence? A long, suffocating silence. Then the sound of paper rustling. The scratch of a pen. Good girl, Jason said, his voice returning to that sickeningly sweet tone. I am doing this for us. I am doing this to protect the family asset. Now go wash your face. You look a mess. I ripped the earbuds out of my ears and threw them against the dashboard. A primal roar tore from my throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated hatred. He wasn't just poisoning me. He was doing it to her, too. He was gaslighting my pregnant daughter, convincing her that she had inherited my non-existent madness, all to steal her child and her inheritance. He was a monster, a parasite that had burrowed into the heart of my family and was eating us from the inside out. I started the truck, the engine roaring to life like a beast waking up. I didn't drive home. I drove to my private office in the city, the one place they hadn't contaminated. The drive was a blur of red lights and wet asphalt. I didn't feel the road. I only felt the burning need to end this. I stormed into my office, slamming the heavy door behind me. The room was lined with awards blueprints of skyscrapers I had built, photos of me and Emily when she was a child. It was a monument to a life of hard work and integrity, and Jason was trying to turn it all into a gambling chip. I looked at the massive oak desk in the center of the room. It was a solid piece of furniture built to last 100 years. I walked around it, my breathing ragged. The image of Emily crying, signing away her rights, flashed before my eyes. The image of the yellow pill. The image of Patricia smiling. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I clenched my fist, winding back, and with every ounce of strength in my 72-year-old body, I punched the center of the desk. Crack! Pain exploded up my arm, sharp and electric. My knuckles split. Blood smeared onto the polished wood. But the pain was good. The pain was real. It cut through the fog of their lies. It reminded me that I was alive, that I was dangerous, and that I was not the frail old man they thought I was. I stared at the blood on the desk. My blood. The blood, Jason said, was tainted with madness. I am not a victim, I growled to the empty room. I am the architect, and I am about to bring the roof down on their heads. I reached for the secure landline on my desk with my bleeding hand. I didn't care about the mess. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice. Sarah Jenkins, attorney at law, a sharp voice answered. Sarah, I said. My voice was no longer the wavering tone of a confused senior. It was low, cold, and hard as steel. Harrison. You sound different. Is everything okay? I looked at the toxicology report in my other hand. No, Sarah. Everything is not okay. But it is about to be handled. What do you need? She asked, sensing the shift. I need you to prepare the documents we discussed, I said. Not the draft, the final version, the nuclear option. And Sarah, yes, get the private jet ready. I need to move Emily tonight. Harrison, what is happening? I am executing Plan B. I said, wiping the blood from my knuckles onto a handkerchief. They wanted a war of attrition. I am giving them a blitzkrieg. Meet me at the airfield in 2 hours, and bring a notary. I hung up the phone. The time for observation was over. The time for gathering evidence was done. I had the poison. I had the tape. I had the motive. Now I was going to construct a trap so intricate, so devastating, that by the time they realized they were caught, they would already be buried. I wrapped my hand in the handkerchief, grabbed the file, and walked out of the office. The pain in my hand was throbbing a steady drumbeat of war. Jason wanted to play games with mental health fine. I was about to drive him insane. I parked my truck 2 blocks away from the Rusty Spoon, a 24-hour diner on the edge of the industrial district that smelled permanently of bacon grease and stale cigarette smoke. It was the last place anyone would look for Harrison Vance, the real estate tycoon. It was the last place anyone would look for Sarah Jenkins, one of the most expensive corporate attorneys in Boston. But that was exactly why we were here. When you are planning to bury your enemies, you do not hold the strategy meeting in a glass-walled conference room. You do it in the shadows. I walked in, pulling my baseball cap lower over my eyes. Sarah was already there, sitting in the furthest booth, her back to the wall. She looked out of place in her tailored charcoal suit, surrounded by truckers and third-shift factory workers. On the Formica table in front of her sat a thick stack of legal documents, bound with a heavy metal clip. To the waitress pouring coffee, it probably looked like a divorce settlement or a business contract. To me, it looked like a loaded weapon. Harrison, Sarah said, as I slid into the booth opposite her. She didn't smile. Her face was pale, her eyes scanning the room nervously. I have been practicing law for 20 years. I have dismantled hostile takeovers. I have defended clients against the SEC. But this is entirely different. I took the black coffee she had ordered for me. My hand was steady. The bandage on my knuckles from where I punched the desk was hidden inside my jacket pocket. "Is it ready?" I asked. Sarah placed her hand on the stack of papers. "It is ready. But I need you to be absolutely certain before you touch this pen. This isn't just a trap, Harrison. This is a labyrinth. Once they sign this, there is no way out. Not for them and not for us if we get caught manipulating the disclosure forms." I looked at the document. The cover page read, "Transfer of Executive Control and Asset Management, Vance Holdings, LLC." It looked impressive. It looked like the golden ticket Jason and Patricia had been dreaming of. It granted them full power of attorney, full access to the corporate accounts, and immediate executive decision-making power over my entire estate. "Walk me through the fine print, Sarah," I said, taking a sip of the bitter coffee. "I want to hear the snap of the trap." Sarah opened the document to page 42. The text here was dense, single-spaced, and written in the kind of complex legalese that makes most people's eyes glaze over. Jason Bennett, the man who couldn't be bothered to read an investment prospectus, wouldn't make it past the first paragraph. "Here," Sarah said, pointing to a clause buried in the middle of the page. "This acts as an umbrella acceptance clause. By assuming executive control of Vance Holdings, the new directors, that is Jason and Patricia, automatically assume personal liability for all subsidiary assets and, crucially, all subsidiary debts and legal entanglements acquired within the last fiscal quarter." "And what have we acquired?" I asked, knowing the answer, but needing to hear it aloud to solidify my resolve. Sarah flipped to the appendix. "We finalized the purchase of Titan Eco Solutions this morning, using the shell company you set up. On paper, Titan looks like a waste management firm with potential. In reality, it is a toxic asset in every sense of the word. They are currently carrying $20 million in defaulted loans that are being called in by creditors next week." $20 million, I repeated. "That covers Jason's gambling debts 4 times over. But that is just money. Money they can declare bankruptcy on." "I need more, Sarah." Sarah hesitated, then turned the page again. "This is the kill shot, Harrison. Titan isn't just broke. They are currently the primary subject of a federal investigation for dumping chemical waste into the Charles River watershed. The EPA and the FBI have been building a case for 6 months. The indictments are sealed, but they are dropping on Monday." I leaned back against the cracked vinyl of the booth. Monday. The timing was exquisite. And the liability, I asked, because Titan was purchased as a distressed asset under specific emergency management protocols. Sarah explained, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The liability pierces the corporate veil. The directors don't just pay a fine. The directors are criminally responsible for the negligence. By signing this transfer today, Jason and Patricia aren't just becoming CEOs. They are volunteering to be the fall guys for a federal crime. They will be facing minimum mandatory sentences of 10 to 15 years in federal prison." I looked at the document. It was a masterpiece of legal engineering. It gave them exactly what they wanted: the crown. They just didn't know the crown was made of lead, and they were standing in deep water. "They will never read page 42, I said quietly. "They are too arrogant. They think I am senile. They think I am handing this over because I am weak, because the drugs are working. They will see the title, they will see the bank account numbers, and they will sign." Sarah looked at me with a mixture of admiration and fear. "You are destroying your own company To catch them, Harrison. Vance Holdings will be dragged through the mud. The stock will tank when the investigation goes public. You are burning down the village to kill the wolves. I can rebuild a company. I said, my voice hard. I did it once, I can do it again. But I cannot rebuild my daughter if they destroy her. I cannot rebuild my life if they put me in a home and let me rot. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my favorite fountain pen. It was a Mont Blanc, a gift from Emily when she graduated college. It felt heavy and substantial in my hand. I flipped to the signature page. My name was typed there, Harrison J. Vance. Below it was a blank line waiting for my surrender. Sarah watched me holding her breath. This is the point of no return. I looked at the paper. I thought about the orange juice glass in Emily's shaking hand. I thought about the yellow pill hidden in my sofa. I thought about Jason's laugh as he planned my funeral. I uncapped the pen. The nib gleamed under the harsh diner lights. I didn't tremble. I didn't hesitate. I signed my name with a flourish, the blue ink flowing smoothly onto the white paper. But I didn't sign it with the shaky, weak signature of a dying man. I signed it with the bold, aggressive stroke of the architect who had reshaped the city skyline. I closed the folder and slid it back across the table to Sarah. Pack it up, I said. Put it in the official binder. Make it look like the keys shamis to the kingdom. Sarah put the document into her briefcase and clicked the locks shut. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet diner. What happens now? She asked. Now, I said, standing up and throwing a $20 bill on the table for the coffee. Now I go home. I call a family meeting. I play the part of the defeated old man one last time. I hand them the rope, Sarah, and I watch them tie the noose around their own necks. I walked toward the door feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The fear was gone. The uncertainty was gone. All that was left was the cold mathematical certainty of cause and effect. Let them think they have won, I whispered to the night air as I stepped out into the parking lot. Let them pop the champagne. Let them plan their vacations. Because the higher they climb, the harder they fall. And I am going to be there to watch them hit the ground. The living room was staged perfectly for a surrender. I had asked Patricia to light a fire in the hearth, complaining that my bones felt cold, a symptom of the withdrawal I was genuinely feeling as my body purged the last of the poison. But the chill in the room had nothing to do with the temperature. It was the icy anticipation of two predators waiting for their prey to finally stop kicking. I sat in my favorite leather wingback chair, a blanket draped over my legs, my hands resting on the head of my cane. I made sure they trembled visibly. It wasn't hard. The adrenaline coursing through my system was making my heart race like a piston engine, but I channeled all that energy into the performance of a lifetime. When the doorbell rang, Patricia practically leaped from the sofa to answer it. She ushered Sarah in with a warmth that was as fake as the pearls around her neck. Sarah played her part flawlessly. She walked in with the heavy leather binder tucked under her arm, her face a mask of professional solemnity. She didn't look at me with pity or conspiracy. She looked at me like a lawyer witnessing the end of an era. Good evening, everyone, Sarah said, placing the binder on the coffee table with a heavy thud. The sound seemed to suck the air out of the room. I have prepared the documents as requested by Mr. Vance. Jason was standing by the fireplace nursing a scotch. He looked impatient, checking his watch every 30 seconds. He knew the transfer from the bank was still stuck, and his creditors were likely breathing down his neck. He needed this signature, like a drowning man needs air. Let's get on with it, Jason said, taking a sip of his drink. Harrison needs his rest. I cleared my throat, a dry, rattling sound that made Patricia wince. I looked around the room, letting my gaze drift unfocused for a moment, before landing on them. I am tired, I whispered, letting my voice crack. I tried to open the safe this morning to get my watch, the one my father gave me. I couldn't remember the combination. I stood there for 20 minutes, and I just couldn't remember the numbers. Patricia sat on the arm of my chair, placing a hand on my shoulder. It is okay, Harrison. That is why we are doing this. So you don't have to worry about those things anymore. I nodded slowly, looking down at my shaking hands. You are right. I built this company from nothing. I built this family. But I can't hold it up anymore. The weight, it is too heavy. I looked at Jason. He was leaning forward now, his eyes hungry. I want to give it to you, I said, gesturing vaguely at the binder. All of it. The company, the accounts, the decisions. I just want to sit here and watch the fire. I just want peace. Sarah opened the binder. The pages were crisp and white, dense with legal jargon. She flipped past the first few pages, the ones that outlined the general transfer of power, and stopped at the signature page. But before she turned the binder toward them, she paused. I must advise you both, Sarah said, looking strictly at Jason and Patricia. This is a total transfer of executive liability. By signing this, you are assuming full legal and financial responsibility for Vance Holdings and all its current subsidiaries. You are not just inheriting the assets. You are inheriting the operational reality of the business as it stands today. Do you understand? Jason laughed, a short barking sound. We know how business works, Sarah. We don't need a lecture. We are ready to take the reins. He didn't ask what the current subsidiaries were. He didn't ask about the operational reality. He didn't ask to read the due diligence reports that were tabbed in red at the back of the binder. He just saw the finish line. Patricia was equally eager. She reached for the gold pen Sarah had placed on the table. Of course we understand. We just want to do what is best for Harrison. Then please, Sarah said, sliding the binder toward them. Sign here as the new directors. Jason put his glass down and practically snatched the pen from Patricia's hand. He didn't even sit down. He bent over the coffee table, scribbling his signature with a violent, jagged energy. He pressed so hard I thought he might tear the paper. There, he said, straightening up and handing the pen to Patricia. Your turn, Patty. Patricia sat down and signed with a flourish, her signature looping and elegant, right next to his. She looked up at me as she capped the pen, a smile playing on her lips that didn't reach her eyes. It is done, she said softly. Sarah took the binder back. She checked the signatures, then nodded once. She turned the page to the notary section, stamped it, and signed her own name. The sound of the stamp hitting the paper echoed like a gavel striking a sounding block. It is official, Sarah said, closing the binder. The transfer is immediate. As of this moment, Mr. Vance is retired, and you are the legal owners and operators of Vance Holdings. I let out a long, shuddering sigh and let my head fall back against the chair. Thank you, I whispered. Thank you for taking the burden. Jason walked over to the window and pulled out his phone. I could see him typing furiously, probably texting his bookie that the money was coming. He turned back to the room, his face flushed with victory. Well, this calls for a celebration, Patricia said, standing up. I have a bottle of Dom Perignon in the cellar. Jason waved his hand dismissively. Save the champagne, Patty. I have to make a few calls. We have a company to run. He walked over to me. I thought he was going to thank me or perhaps offer a platitude about taking care of the legacy. Instead, he leaned down, his face inches from mine. I could smell the scotch on his breath, mixed with the metallic tang of pure malice. He patted my cheek. It wasn't a gentle pat. It was a slap light enough to be deniable, but hard enough to sting. Smart decision, old man, he whispered, his voice dropping so low that Sarah couldn't hear him from the door. You finally did something useful. He straightened up, buttoning his jacket, looking at me with a sneer that stripped away every layer of the polite son-in-law he had played for years. Now you can rest, he said, and then he paused, a cruel glint in his eyes. Permanently. He turned and walked out of the room without looking back. Patricia followed him, shooting me one last glance that was a mixture of pity and triumph before disappearing into the hallway. I sat there in the silence, listening to their footsteps fade. Sarah stood by the door, clutching the binder to her chest. She looked pale. She had heard the tone, if not the words. I stopped shaking. I lifted my head from the headrest and sat up straight. The frailty vanished. The confusion evaporated. I looked at the fire, watching the logs turn to ash, and I felt a cold, hard satisfaction settle in my chest. They had signed. They had taken the bait, the hook, and the line. They thought they had just inherited an empire. They had no idea they had just handcuffed themselves to a sinking ship loaded with toxic waste. I looked at Sarah. "File it," I said, my voice steady and strong. "File it with the court first thing in the morning, and call the pilot." Sarah nodded and slipped out the front door into the night. I was alone in the house that was no longer mine, stripped of my company, stripped of my assets. But I had never felt more powerful. Jason thought I was going to rest permanently. He was wrong. I wasn't going to rest. I was going to work. Tonight, I had one last job to do. I had to get Emily out of that house before the FBI raided Vance Holdings on Monday morning, and Jason realized he had been played. The war wasn't over. The first battle was won, but the rescue mission was just beginning. The dashboard clock of my truck glowed a neon green 2:14 a.m. as I idled down the street from Jason's house, killing the headlights to blend into the shadows of the sleeping suburb. I hadn't slept a wink. My body was humming with a dangerous cocktail of caffeine and adrenaline, the kind that kept me alert on construction sites for 48-hour shifts back in the day. But this wasn't a job site. This was a rescue mission. I knew exactly where Jason and Patricia were. The tracker on my wife's car showed them at the Ritz-Carlton downtown. They were undoubtedly popping that bottle of Dom Perignon, toasting to their newfound empire, drunk on greed, and the false security I had handed them on a silver platter. They thought the war was over. They thought the old man was asleep in his bed, dreaming of the past. But they had made a fatal miscalculation. They assumed that because I had surrendered the company, I had surrendered my daughter. They were wrong. I pulled the truck up to the curb, 2 houses down, grabbing the tire iron from under the seat, not because I intended to use it, but because old habits die hard. I slipped the spare key to Jason's front door out of my pocket. I had kept it on my keychain for 3 years, ever since they moved, in a silent promise that I would always be there if they got locked out. Tonight, I was the one breaking in. The house was dark, a looming silhouette against the night sky. I moved quickly up the driveway, sticking to the grass to avoid the crunch of gravel. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from a terrifying clarity. Emily was in there alone. And now that Jason had the signature he wanted, Emily was no longer a leverage point. She was a liability, a loose end. And I knew how men like Jason dealt with loose ends. I reached the front door and slid the key into the lock. It turned with a smooth, silent click. I pushed the door open and stepped into the foyer. The air inside was stale, smelling faintly of cleaning products and neglect. Silence pressed against my ears. I moved up the stairs, skipping the 3rd step, because I knew it creaked. I had built houses like this my whole life. I knew their bones, their secrets, and their weaknesses. I reached the landing and turned toward the master bedroom. The door was closed. I turned the handle. Locked. Locked from the outside. A cold rage washed over me. You don't lock a pregnant woman in her room for her safety. You lock her in like a prisoner. I didn't have time for finesse. I took a step back and kicked the door right next to the lock mechanism. It wasn't a movie-style kick, just a sharp, precise application of force that snapped the jam. The door swung open with a loud crack that echoed through the empty house like a gunshot. Emily was sitting up in bed, instantly pulling the sheets up to her chin. Her eyes were wide, filled with absolute terror in the moonlight filtering through the blinds. When she saw my silhouette in the doorway, she didn't look relieved. She looked horrified. "Dad," Yoe whimpered, her voice trembling. "Go away, please, just go away. Jason said you would come. He said you would try to hurt me." She scrambled backward against the headboard, reaching for the phone on the nightstand. I was across the room in 2 strides. I grabbed her hand before she could dial 911. She screamed a high-pitched sound of pure panic. I had to be rougher than I wanted to be. I clamped my hand over her mouth, silencing the scream, and pinned her wrist to the mattress. "Look at me," I hissed, leaning down so my face was inches from hers. "Look at my eyes." "Emily." She struggled, kicking her legs, tears streaming down her face. She was fighting me like I was a monster. That was what they had done to her. They had turned her father into a boogeyman. "I am not crazy, Emily," I whispered fiercely. "I am not on drugs. I am not confused. I am here to save your life." She stopped kicking, but her eyes were still wild. I slowly removed my hand from her mouth. "He said you would say that," she sobbed, her body shaking violently. "He said the mania makes you paranoid. He said you would try to kidnap me." I pulled my phone out of my pocket. My hands were steady. "I am not going to argue with you," I said, my voice dropping to a calm, commanding tone. "I am going to show you." I tapped the screen and brought up the video file from the hidden camera in my living room, the one from 3 days ago. The one where Jason and Patricia were drinking my scotch and planning our destruction. "Watch," I commanded, holding the screen in front of her face. She tried to look away. "No, I don't want to see your delusions." "Watch it," I roared, a flash of the old Harrison Vance, the man who commanded respect from ironworkers and city planners alike. She flinched, then looked at the screen. The video played. The audio was crisp in the silent bedroom. "It's pathetic, Jason," Patricia's voice rang out from the phone. "He's like a dog that keeps coming back to the hand that beats it." Emily froze. She stopped breathing. Then came Jason's voice. "Once Emily drops the kid, I withdraw the tube. We declare him incompetent." I watched my daughter's face as the video played. I watched the denial fight against the reality. I watched her eyes widen as she heard her husband, the man she loved, call her a cow and laugh about putting her in a padded room. When the video ended, the silence in the room was heavier than the door I had just broken. Emily didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stared at the blank screen, her mouth slightly open, her entire world collapsing in real time. The gaslighting broke. The fog lifted, and in its place came a pain so raw I could feel it radiating off her. That's Mom," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "And Jason." "It was Tuesday," I said, gently putting the phone away. "They have been poisoning me with antipsychotics to fake dementia, and they have been drugging you to keep you docile. They don't love us, baby girl. We are just piggy banks to them." Emily looked at me. For the first time in months, she really saw me. She saw the dad who taught her to ride a bike, the dad who sat through her recitals, the dad who built this life for her. She grabbed my arm, her grip desperate and strong. "Dad," she choked out, a sob breaking through. "I signed the papers. I signed the custody agreement." "It doesn't matter," I said, pulling her into a hug. She buried her face in my shoulder, weeping uncontrollably. "We are going to fix it. But right now we have to move. We have to get you out of here before he comes back." I pulled her out of bed. She was heavy, her movements sluggish from whatever they had given her earlier, but panic was a powerful stimulant. "Grab your shoes," I ordered. "Nothing else. We buy new clothes. We buy new everything. Just get your shoes." She nodded, wiping her face with the back of her hand. She slipped on her sneakers, her hands shaking so hard she couldn't tie the laces. I knelt down and tied them for her, just like I used to when she was 5. "Come on," I said, helping her up. We moved down the stairs, me supporting her weight, her clinging to my jacket like a lifeline. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a siren. My senses were on high alert. I needed to get her to the airfield. Sarah was waiting with the jet. Once we were in the air, we were untouchable. We reached the front door. The cool night air hit our faces, smelling of wet asphalt and freedom. "Just a few more steps, honey," I whispered, leading her toward my truck parked down the street. We stepped onto the driveway. The gravel crunched under our feet. And then the world exploded in light. High beams cut through the darkness, blinding us. A car engine roared, approaching fast, too fast. I threw my arm up to shield my eyes, pulling Emily behind me. The car swerved into the driveway, tires screeching on the pavement, spraying gravel everywhere. It skidded to a halt just 10 feet from us, the engine idling with a menacing growl. The headlights dimmed and I saw the silhouette of the Mercedes. My stomach dropped. They were back. Hours early. The driver's door flew open. Jason stepped out. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. His tie was undone. And he wasn't smiling. "Well, well, well," he said, his voice slurred but dangerous. "The alarm on my phone said the front door was opened. I thought it might be a burglar." He walked into the light of the headlamps, holding a heavy tire iron loosely in his right hand. "But it is just family," he sneered, looking from me to Emily. "Trying to steal what is mine." Emily whimpered behind me, gripping my coat so hard I could feel her nails digging into my skin. "Get back in the house, Emily," Jason commanded, pointing the tire iron at her. I stepped forward, putting myself squarely between the monster and my daughter. I didn't have a weapon. I didn't have a plan for a physical fight with a man half my age. But I had something he didn't. I had nothing left to lose. "She is not going anywhere with you, Jason," I said, my voice low and steady. "It is over." Jason laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Over, old man, we are just getting started. And since you broke into my house in the middle of the night, well, self-defense is a very strong legal argument for what happens next." He took a step forward, raising the iron. I braced myself. The extraction had just turned into a war. The glare of the headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating Jason like a demon on a stage. He stood in the middle of the driveway, his legs spread wide in a stance of arrogant defiance. In his right hand he gripped a wooden baseball bat, tapping it rhythmically against his palm. The sound was dull and heavy, a metronome counting down to violence. I could see the sweat glistening on his forehead and the wild, unfocused look in his eyes. He was drunk on alcohol, high on cocaine, and overdosing on the power he thought he had won. Emily shrank down in the passenger seat, covering her head with her hands. She was trembling so violently that the whole truck seemed to shake with her. "Lock the door," I said quietly. My voice was the only calm thing in the cab. Jason took a step forward, swinging the bat loosely. He shouted something, his voice slurred but loud enough to penetrate the glass. "Where do you think you are going, old man? You think you can just take my property?" He wasn't talking about the truck. He was pointing the bat at Emily. To him, she wasn't a wife or a partner. She was an asset. She was the vessel carrying the heir to the trust fund he had just tried to steal. She was a cash cow, and I was the thief. I didn't roll down the window. I didn't engage. I looked at the gap between his Mercedes and the stone pillar of the gate. It was narrow, maybe 6 feet. Not enough for my Ford F-150 to pass through without contact. Jason laughed, seeing me hesitate. He thought I was afraid. He thought the Harrison Vance who built skyscrapers would be intimidated by a thug in a dress shirt. "Get out of the car," he screamed, smashing the bat against the hood of my truck. The metal dented with a sickening crunch. "Give me the keys, you senile old bat, before I drag you out." I looked at Emily. "Keep your head down, baby. This is going to get bumpy." I didn't reverse. I didn't try to go around him. I shifted the truck into drive. I gripped the steering wheel with hands that had poured concrete and welded steel. I looked Jason dead in the eye through the windshield. He stopped laughing. He saw the engine rev. He saw the intent. For a split second, the drugs wore off, and I saw genuine fear flicker across his face. He scrambled backward, tripping over his own feet, swinging the bat wildly at the air. I slammed my foot onto the gas pedal. The truck roared. It surged forward like a charging bull. I didn't aim for Jason. I aimed for the Mercedes blocking my path. The impact was deafening. My heavy steel bumper slammed into the side of his pristine German engineering. Glass shattered. Metal shrieked as it tore. The Mercedes spun violently, its rear end smashing into the stone pillar, clearing just enough space for me to scrape through. My truck shuddered, sparks flying as my passenger side ground against the stone gate, but we were through. I didn't look back to see if Jason was hurt. I didn't care. I hit the asphalt of the main road and floored it. "Dad," Emily cried, looking back. "He is coming." I checked the rearview mirror. Through the cracked glass, I saw the Mercedes. The side was caved in, one headlight was smashed, but the engine was still running. Jason was behind the wheel, his face a mask of bloody rage. He peeled out of the driveway, tires smoking, and gave chase. We hit the highway on-ramp doing 70. The rain had turned the asphalt into a black mirror, slick and dangerous. I knew this truck. I knew its weight limits. I knew how it handled in a skid. Jason was driving a high-performance sports sedan, but he was intoxicated and reckless. That was my advantage. He came up fast on my left, his high beams blinding me in the side mirror. He swerved, trying to clip my rear bumper, trying to spin me out. This is a move called the pit maneuver. Police use it. Jason had probably seen it in movies. "Hold on," I yelled to Emily. I tapped the brakes just for a second. Jason mistimed his swerve. He shot past me, missing my bumper by inches. He overcorrected his car, fishtailing wildly on the wet road, before he regained control. He pulled up alongside me, now matching my speed at 85 miles per hour. He rolled down his window, ignoring the rain lashing into his face. He was screaming, his mouth moving in silent fury, gesturing for me to pull over. He looked like a madman. I kept my eyes on the road, my hands steady at 10 and 2. I wasn't going to play his game. I just needed to get to the airfield. Sarah was waiting. The jet was waiting. Jason realized I wasn't stopping. He wrenched his steering wheel to the right, slamming the side of his car into my door. Bang! The truck lurched. Emily screamed. The metal groaned under the impact. "He hit us! He is trying to kill us!" she sobbed. "He is trying to scare us," I said through gritted teeth, fighting the steering wheel to keep us in the lane. "He needs you alive, Emily. But he doesn't care about me." He hit us again. Harder this time. I felt the truck slide toward the guardrail. Sparks flew as my tires grazed the gravel shoulder. Below us was a drop into the dark woods. I had to end this. I saw an exit ramp coming up. It was a sharp curve marked 25 miles per hour. We were doing 90. I stayed in the left lane, signaling that I was continuing straight. Jason stayed glued to my right side, blocking me from exiting, pinning me against the median. Perfect. At the very last second, I slammed on the brakes. The anti-lock system pulsed violently under my foot. My truck decelerated rapidly. Jason shot forward. He didn't have time to react. He flew past me. I wrenched the wheel to the right, cutting across 2 lanes of traffic, barely making the exit ramp. I saw Jason's brake lights flare red in the distance, but it was too late for him. He missed the exit. He would have to drive 3 miles to the next turnaround. I navigated the sharp curve of the ramp, the tires squealing in protest, and merged onto the dark back road that led to the private airfield. "We lost him," I said, letting out a breath I had been holding for 10 miles. "We are safe, Em." Emily was shaking her face, buried in her hands. I reached over and squeezed her shoulder. "It is okay. We are almost there." But just as the adrenaline began to fade, a new light flooded the cabin. Blue and red. I looked in the rearview mirror. A police cruiser was right behind me, siren-wailing lights flashing. "Thank God," Emily gasped, sitting up. "The police. Dad, pull over. Tell them what happened. Tell them Jason tried to kill us." I felt a cold stone drop in my stomach. I looked at the speedometer. I was doing 40 in a 35 zone. I wasn't speeding excessively. They hadn't seen the chase on the highway. Why were they pulling me over now? Then I remembered Jason's phone. The texting. The calls. He hadn't just called his bookie. I pulled the truck over to the shoulder and put it in park. I looked at Emily. Her eyes were wide with hope. She thought we were saved. "Do not say anything." "Emily," I said sharply. "Let me talk." The officer stepped out of his cruiser, hand on his holster. He didn't approach the window casually. He approached tactically. He shined his flashlight directly into my eyes. "Driver, turn off the engine and throw the keys out the window," he shouted. I complied. Hands where I can see them, I put my hands on the steering wheel. A second cruiser pulled up in front of me, blocking my path. Then a third. "What is happening?" Emily whispered, panic rising in her voice again. "Why are there so many of them?" The officer approached my window. "Harrison Vance?" he asked. "Yes," I said calmly. "Step out of the vehicle slowly. You are under arrest." "Arrest for what?" Emily screamed. "He saved me. My husband is the one chasing us." The officer ignored her. He opened my door and yanked me out, spinning me around and slamming me against the cold, wet metal of the truck. I felt the cold steel of handcuffs snap around my wrists. "You are under arrest for the kidnapping of Emily Bennett and the assault of Jason Bennett," the officer recited. I closed my eyes as my cheek pressed against the wet paint. Jason had played his ace. He had called 911 the moment I broke down the bedroom door. He had reported a violent, mentally unstable old man kidnapping his pregnant wife. To the police, I wasn't a hero. I was a confused, dangerous senior citizen who had just rammed a car and abducted a woman. I looked back at this truck. Another officer was helping Emily out. She was screaming, trying to pull away, trying to run to me. "Dad, he is lying." "Dad." I didn't struggle. I didn't shout. I stood tall, even in handcuffs. "It is okay, Emily," I shouted over the sirens. "Call Sarah. Call the lawyer." They shoved me into the back of the cruiser. The smell of stale coffee and vinyl filled my nose. Through the cage, I saw the headlights of a Mercedes pulling up slowly past the police line. Jason rolled down his window. His face was bloody, his car was wrecked, but he was smiling. He looked at me in the back of the cop car, and then he looked at the officers escorting a sobbing Emily toward an ambulance. He had won the battle. He had turned the law into his weapon. But as the cruiser pulled away, taking me to a cell instead of the airfield, I didn't feel defeated. I felt focused. Jason thought this was the end. He thought putting me in a cage would stop me. He forgot one thing. I had already signed the papers. The trap was already set. And by arresting me by making this a matter of public record, he had just ensured that when the FBI raided his office on Monday, there would be a police report proving he was the one in charge. I leaned my head back against the seat and watched the rain streak the window. "Enjoy the victory lap, Jason," I whispered, "because you are running straight off a cliff." The red and blue lights blinded me, flashing in a dizzying rhythm against the wet asphalt. I was barely out of the truck before 3 officers were on me. I didn't resist. I knew better than to fight armed men who were running on adrenaline and bad information. I raised my hands, my wrists aching, but before I could speak, I was spun around and slammed against the side of my vehicle. The cold metal pressed against my cheek, mixing with the grit of the road and the relentless rain. One officer kicked my legs apart, patting me down with rough, efficient movements. I felt the steel of the handcuffs bite into my skin, snapping shut with a finality that echoed in the hollow pit of my stomach. I was Harrison Vance. I had built the city hall these men reported to. I had designed the precinct where they booked criminals. And now I was being treated like the worst kind of felon on the side of a dark highway. From the other side of the truck, I heard Emily screaming. It was a sound that tore through my heart, a raw, primal cry of desperation. "He is innocent," she wailed, struggling as a female officer tried to guide her toward an ambulance. "He didn't kidnap me, he saved me. Please, you have to listen." The officer holding me tightened his grip on my arm. "Stop moving, sir. She is telling the truth," I said, my voice calm despite the chaos. "I am not kidnapping her. I am her father. We are fleeing a domestic abuse situation. Check the records." The officer didn't look at me. He looked at his radio. "Dispatch, we have the suspect in custody. Confirming identity as Harrison Vance." There was a crackle of static, and then a dispassionate voice replied. "Affirmative. Be advised, suspect has a medical flag in the system. Advanced dementia with episodes of violent psychosis. Legal guardian has reported him missing and dangerous. Approach with extreme caution." My blood ran cold. A medical flag. Patricia hadn't just spread rumors. She had formally filed falsified medical documents with the state police database. To these officers, I wasn't a desperate father. I was a lunatic who had snapped. "That is a lie," Emily screamed, breaking free for a second and running toward me before the officers grabbed her again. "He is not crazy. My husband is the one who called you. He is the criminal, ma'am, please," the female officer said, her voice dripping with that condescending patience used for hysterical victims. "You are safe now. We know you are confused. Trauma can make you defend your captor. It is called Stockholm Syndrome. Let the paramedics look at you." They weren't listening to her. They were interpreting her defense of me as a symptom of her own victimization. The trap Jason and Patricia had built was perfect. It accounted for everything, even the truth. I watched helplessly as they forced my weeping daughter into the back of an ambulance. She looked at me through the rear window, her hand pressed against the glass, mouthing the word "Dad" over and over again. I wanted to roar. I wanted to break the cuffs and tear the world apart. But I stood still. I knew that any sign of aggression would just prove the file right. Then a sleek black car pulled up behind the wall of police cruisers. It was the Mercedes, battered and scraped from our collision, looking like a war machine that had taken a hit, but kept moving. The doors opened. Jason and Patricia stepped out into the rain. They didn't look like the monsters I knew. They looked like shattered, terrified family members. Patricia was crying, clutching a handkerchief to her mouth. Jason was limping slightly, holding his side, playing the injured hero to perfection. "Oh, thank God," Patricia cried out, rushing toward the police line. "Is he okay? Is my husband okay?" "Ma'am, stay back," an officer said, stepping forward. "Please," she sobbed, grabbing the officer's arm. "He is sick. He doesn't know what he is doing. He thinks he is in the war. He thinks everyone is an enemy. Please don't hurt him." I watched her performance with a sickening sense of awe. She was pleading for mercy for the man she had tried to poison. It was brilliant. It made her look like the saintly suffering wife dealing with a tragic burden. "Harrison," she called out, looking at me with tear-filled eyes. "Why did you run?" "We just want to help you." I stared at her. I didn't say a word. I just looked at her with a cold, dead stare. Jason walked past her, flashing a badge of some sort to the sergeant, probably his corporate security clearance or just a flash of his ID to look important. He spoke in low, serious tones, pointing at me, then at the ambulance. The sergeant nodded sympathetically. Jason walked over to where I was pinned against the truck. The officer made a move to stop him, but Jason held up a hand. "It is okay, officer. I just want to say goodbye. He is my father-in-law." The officer stepped back a few feet, giving us a sliver of privacy. Jason stepped into my personal space. Up close, I could smell the stale alcohol on his breath, mixed with the metallic scent of adrenaline. His eyes were bloodshot, but the fear I had seen on the highway was gone. It was replaced by a gloating, sadistic triumph. He leaned in close, pretending to fix my collar, his face a mask of concern for the cameras and the cops. But when he spoke, his voice was a whisper meant only for me. "You almost had me, old man," he hissed. "I will give you that. The truck. The escape." It was almost impressive. He smiled, a cold, shark-like baring of teeth. "But almost doesn't count, does it? Now you are in the system. Documented violent outburst, kidnapping charge, resisting arrest." I looked him in the eye. "It is not over, Jason." "Oh, but it is," he whispered, leaning closer until his lips brushed my ear. "Sarah can't help you now. No judge will release a violent psychotic to a lawyer. They will remand you to the state facility for evaluation. And guess who has power of attorney over your medical decisions until the court says otherwise?" He paused, letting the implications sink in. "Me," he said. "And do you know what the treatment for recalcitrant violent dementia patients is in the old wing of the hospital electroconvulsive therapy? Shock treatment. High voltage." I stiffened. "By the time you get out of there?" Jason whispered, his voice trembling with dark excitement. "You won't just be pretending to be a vegetable. You will be one. I will fry your brain until you can't remember your own name, let alone the combination to a safe." He patted my cheek hard. "Sleep tight, Dad. Tomorrow the lights go out." He stepped back, his face instantly shifting back to the mask of the grieving son. "Take him away, officer," Jason said, his voice breaking theatrically. "Please, just make sure he doesn't hurt anyone else." The officer grabbed my arm and shoved me toward the cruiser. I didn't look back at Jason. I didn't look at Patricia. I focused on the ground, on the rain washing over my boots. They pushed me into the back seat of the police car. The hard plastic seat was uncomfortable. The cage between me and the driver was a grid of steel mesh. The door slammed shut. The sound was heavy and final, sealing me inside a box of stale air and darkness. Outside, I saw Jason put his arm around Patricia. I saw the ambulance pull away with my daughter. I saw the flashing lights reflecting in the puddles. To the world outside, this was a tragedy resolved. A sick old man was off the streets. A family was safe. I leaned my head against the cold window. The handcuffs dug into my wrists. I was alone. I was captured, and my enemy had just promised to erase my mind. Most men would have broken then. Most men would have wept. But as the cruiser lurched forward, merging back onto the highway that led to the city jail, I didn't cry. I closed my eyes and visualized the document in Sarah's briefcase. I visualized the signature Jason had scrawled so arrogantly. He thought he was sending me to the electric chair. He didn't realize he had already strapped himself into it. The low point is only the end if you stop fighting. And I was just waiting for the bell to ring for the next round. Let them take me to jail. Let them take me to the hospital. Every move they made now was just digging their grave a little deeper. I took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of captivity, and exhaled the fear. Monday is coming. Jason, I thought. And you are going to wish you had let me get on that plane. The holding cell smelled of bleach and unwashed bodies, a sharp chemical tang that burned the back of my throat. I sat on the metal bench, the cold steel seeping through my trousers, listening to the distant hum of the precinct. To my left, a man was snoring loudly, curled into a fetal position. To my right, the bars cast long, jagged shadows across the concrete floor. It had been 2 hours since they brought me in. 2 hours of silence. 2 hours for Jason and Patricia to fill out the paperwork that would strip me of my rights and bury me in a psychiatric ward for the rest of my life. I stared at my hands. They were still cuffed, the metal biting into my wrists, but they weren't shaking. The fear I had felt in the truck, the desperation of the chase, had crystallized into a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't waiting for a miracle. I was waiting for the law to catch up with the crime. The heavy steel door at the end of the corridor clanked open. I didn't look up immediately. I expected a guard, maybe a nurse with a sedative to calm the violent geriatric patient. I braced myself for the sting of a needle. "Mr. Vance," a voice called out. It wasn't a guard. It was a voice I knew better than my own conscience. I looked up. Sarah Jenkins stood on the other side of the bars. She looked impeccable, her charcoal suit unwrinkled, her face a mask of professional fury. But she wasn't alone. Standing next to her was a man I didn't recognize, but I knew his type immediately. Tall, nondescript suit, earpiece eyes that scanned the room like a targeting system. He didn't look like a local cop. He looked like consequences. "Open the cell," the man said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. The desk sergeant, a thick-necked man who had processed me earlier with a sneer, looked up from his clipboard. "I can't do that, sir. This prisoner is on a 72-hour psychiatric hold. He is violent. His family is filling out the commitment forms right now. We are waiting for transport to St. Jude's." The man in the suit stepped forward. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a leather wallet. He flipped it open. The gold badge inside caught the fluorescent light. "I am Special Agent Miller with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Financial Crimes Division. This man is not a psychiatric patient. He is a cooperating witness in a federal money laundering investigation involving international wire fraud and environmental racketeering." The sergeant blinked, his mouth opening slightly. "A federal witness, this guy. He rammed a car and kidnapped his daughter." The agent didn't blink. "He was extracting a key asset from a hostile environment. Under Title 18 of the United States Code, federal jurisdiction supersedes your local hold. I have a writ of habeas corpus here signed by a federal judge 20 minutes ago. You are going to open this gate, or I am going to have you charged with obstruction of justice." The sergeant looked at the badge, then at Sarah, then at me. The color drained from his face. He fumbled for his keys, the jagged metal clinking nervously against the lock. I stood up. My knees popped, but I felt 10 feet tall. The lock turned with a heavy thunk. The gate slid open. Sarah stepped inside. She didn't hug me. She didn't ask if I was okay. She looked at the handcuffs. "Get these off him," she said to the sergeant. "Now!" The sergeant hurried to unlock the cuffs. As the metal sprang open and fell away, I rubbed my wrists. The circulation rushed back, stinging and hot. It felt like victory. "Thank you, Sarah," I said, my voice raspy but steady. She nodded, handing me a handkerchief to wipe the grime from my face. "You cut it close, Harrison. Another hour and you would have been in a van to the asylum." "Is everything ready?" I asked, looking at Agent Miller. The agent nodded. "We have the transfer logs from the bank. We have the wiretap audio from your investigator. And thanks to your lawyer, we have the signed transfer of liability for Vance Holdings." "It is a slam dunk, Mr. Vance. But we need to move. The local police are still processing the assault charges from your son-in-law. We need to clear this up before the DA gets involved." I buttoned my jacket, smoothing out the wrinkles. I felt the weight of the toxicology report in my inside pocket. It was the only thing the police hadn't confiscated, thinking it was just old man papers. "Let's go," I said. "I have a meeting to attend." We walked out of the holding area, the heavy door closing behind us with a satisfying finality. We moved through the booking area, past the confused officers, and into the main lobby of the precinct. The scene that greeted me was almost cinematic. Jason and Patricia were sitting at the detective's desk, looking the picture of tragic grace. Patricia was dabbing her eyes with a tissue, leaning into Jason for support. Jason was holding a pen, hovering over a stack of documents. I could hear his voice, smooth and persuasive. "Yes, detective. It breaks my heart to do this. But for his own safety and the safety of the public, he needs to be in a secure facility. The dementia has made him unpredictable." The detective, nodding along, was sympathetic. "I understand, Mr. Bennett. It is a hard decision, but you are doing the right thing. Just sign here, here, and here." Jason lowered the pen. The tip touched the paper. "Don't sign that, Jason," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise of the station like a knife. "Unless you want to add perjury to your list of crimes." Jason froze. The pen skittered across the paper, leaving a jagged ink trail. He spun around in the chair. Patricia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. They stared at me. They looked at the handcuffs that were no longer on my wrists. They looked at Sarah. And then they looked at the grim-faced FBI agent standing behind me. Harrison Patricia stammered, her face going pale beneath her makeup. How? Why are you out? Jason stood up, his face flushing with anger. Officer, this man is dangerous. Why is he unshackled? He tried to kill me tonight. The FBI agent stepped forward, flashing his badge again. Sit down, Mr. Bennett. Jason didn't sit. He looked trapped. He looked at me, and for the first time, the arrogance cracked. He saw something in my eyes he hadn't seen in months. He saw the architect. I walked over to the desk. The detective tried to stand up, but Agent Miller put a hand on his shoulder. We are taking over this scene, detective. Stand down. I stopped right in front of Jason. I could smell the fear coming off him now, sour and sharp, overpowering the stale alcohol. You told them I was crazy. Jason, I said, my voice calm, almost conversational. You told them I was imagining things. You told them I was senile. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the crumpled envelope from the toxicology lab. I tossed it onto the desk. It landed right on top of the commitment papers. Read it, I commanded. Jason stared at the envelope. He didn't move. Patricia reached out with a trembling hand and picked it up. She pulled out the report. Her eyes scanned the page. Haloperidol. Toxic levels. Chronic administration. She dropped the paper as if it burned her fingers. This is fake, she whispered, looking at the detective. He forged it. He is paranoid. It is from a certified forensic lab. Patricia, I said, and it is dated yesterday. But that is not the only thing I have. I looked at Jason. I know about the gambling, Jason. I know about the $5 million you owe to the South Boston Syndicate. I know you tried to wire $2 million from my account to the Caymans on Friday. Jason's mouth opened and closed like a fish on dry land. You can't prove that. I don't have to, I said, pointing to Agent Miller. He can. He has the bank logs. He has the wiretap of you threatening Emily. And he has the recording of you and Patricia in my living room planning to overdose me. The room went deadly silent. The local detective looked from me to Jason, his expression shifting from sympathy to suspicion. He slowly moved his hand away from the commitment papers and rested it near his holster. Jason looked around the room, realizing the walls were closing in. His eyes darted to the exit. But the best part, I continued leaning in close so only he could hear the full weight of my victory. The papers you signed tonight. The transfer of the company, Jason sneered, trying to claw back some shred of dignity. Yeah, I own Vance Holdings now, old man. I own everything. I smiled. A cold, predatory smile. You own a shell company, Jason. You own Titan Eco Solutions. You own $20 million in toxic debt and a federal indictment for environmental crimes. And because you signed that transfer, you accepted personal liability. Jason's face went white. Whatever color was left drained away instantly. What he whispered. I turned to Sarah. Tell him, Sarah. Sarah stepped forward, her voice crisp and professional. At 9:00 a.m. tomorrow, the EPA is filing criminal charges against the directors of Vance Holdings. Since the transfer was executed and notarized 3 hours ago, that is you, Mr. Bennett. And you, Mrs. Vance. You are looking at 15 years in federal prison. Minimum. Patricia let out a low wail and slumped into her chair. Jason stared at me. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The trap hadn't been the police station. The trap had been the victory I gave him. You set me up, he choked out. I didn't set you up, Jason, I said, straightening my tie. I just let you be yourself, a greedy, arrogant, sloppy amateur. I turned to the FBI agent. Agent Miller. I believe these are the suspects you are looking for. I turned my back on them. I heard the scuffle behind me. I heard Jason screaming that it was a lie, that I was crazy. I heard the click of handcuffs. But it wasn't my wrists they were closing around this time. I walked toward the exit of the police station. The automatic doors slid open, letting in the cool night air. The rain had stopped. The play is over, I whispered to the city skyline, and the house lights are finally coming on. The silence that followed my revelation was absolute, a vacuum, where the air had been sucked out of the room by the sheer weight of the truth. Jason stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, the color draining from his face until he looked like a wax figure. Patricia was gripping the edge of the detective's desk, her knuckles white, her eyes darting frantically from me to the FBI agent as if searching for an exit that didn't exist. Then the silence was shattered. It started with a single vibration against the wood of the desk. Jason's phone. Then it buzzed again, and again. A relentless, angry rhythm that echoed off the precinct walls. It wasn't the ringtone of a business partner or a friend. It was the insistent, panicked demand of a world collapsing. Jason looked down at the screen. I saw his throat work as he swallowed. "Answer it, Jason," I said softly. "It is probably important." He didn't move. He couldn't. So the phone answered itself in a way. A notification popped up on the lock screen, bright enough for all of us to see. Bank alert, insufficient funds, account frozen. Then another one, urgent margin call. Then a text message from a number I recognized as the collection arm of the South Boston Syndicate. It was short. "Time is up." Sarah stepped forward. She didn't look at Jason with triumph. She looked at him with the clinical detachment of a coroner, pronouncing a time of death. "You might want to check your email as well." "Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice cutting through the buzzing of the phone. "My office took the liberty of filing the transfer of ownership with the SEC and the state registrar immediately after you signed it. The digital timestamp was 3 hours ago." Jason looked up at her, his eyes wild. You can't do that. It takes days to process." "Not when you pay the expedited filing fee," Sarah replied calmly. "Which means as of right now, you and Patricia are the official owners of Titan Eco Solutions and all its outstanding liabilities. And congratulations, Jason. You have achieved something quite rare. You have managed to inherit $20 million in debt in less than an hour." "$20 million, Patricia whispered. Her voice was trembling. She looked at Jason. "You told me the company was worth millions. You told me we were rich." "We were." Jason shouted, his voice cracking. "It is a trick. He tricked us." Sarah shook her head. "It is not a trick. It is a contract. A contract you signed without reading. And because you signed the personal guarantee clause on page 42, the clause I specifically warned you about, the corporate veil has been pierced." She took a step closer, driving the nail into the coffin. "That means the creditors don't just go after the company assets, Jason. They go after you. And since the company has zero liquidity, the bank is currently executing a lien on your personal property to cover the initial default." Jason stared at her. What does that mean?" "It means," Sarah said, checking her watch, "that right now a repo team is likely towing your Mercedes from the impound lot. It means the locks are being changed on your house in Wellesley. It means every credit card in your wallet is a useless piece of plastic. You are not just bankrupt, Jason. You are destitute." "No," Jason gasped, backing away until he hit the wall. "No, the house is in the trust." "Not anymore," I interjected. "The document you signed dissolved the trust and moved all assets into the holding company to cover the liability. You leveraged your own home to pay for a toxic waste dump. You did it to yourself." The reality hit them like a physical shockwave, but it hit Patricia harder. I watched her face transform. The mask of the loving wife, the grieving stepmother, the elegant socialite, it all melted away in seconds. Beneath it was the face of a survivor, a parasite who realized its host was dead. She looked at Jason not with love, but with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You idiot!" she screamed. The sound was shrill and animalistic. She lunged at him. It happened so fast the officers didn't react immediately. Patricia clawed at Jason's face, her manicured nails digging into his skin, leaving angry red welts. "You ruined me," she shrieked, striking him again and again. "I trusted you. You said you had a plan. You said the old man was stupid. You are the stupid one. You signed it. You made me sign it." Jason, fueled by his own panic and the humiliation of the moment, shoved her back. She stumbled and fell against the filing cabinets, knocking over a stack of papers. "Get off me!" Jason yelled, his voice raw. "You wanted the money just as much as I did. You were the one who suggested the pills. You were the one who researched the dosage." The room went deadly quiet again. Even the detective froze. Jason stopped, his chest heaving, realizing what he had just screamed in a police station full of witnesses and recording devices. Patricia lay on the floor, looking up at him with horror. He had just confessed. He had just implicated them both in attempted murder. Agent Miller stepped forward. "That is enough." He nodded to the officers. "Take them into custody." The detective, who had been ready to commit me to an asylum 10 minutes ago, pulled his handcuffs from his belt. He walked over to Jason. "Jason Bennett, you are under arrest for financial fraud, environmental racketeering, and based on your spontaneous utterance just now, conspiracy to commit murder. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Jason didn't fight. He looked broken. The arrogance was gone. The swagger was gone. He turned around slowly, a man moving through a nightmare. The cuffs clicked shut. Patricia tried to scramble to her feet, fixing her hair, trying to regain some shred of dignity. "Wait," she stammered, looking at the officers. I was manipulated. I didn't know. He forced me. I am a victim here." Agent Miller shook his head. "Mrs. Vance, we have your signature on the falsified medical reports. We have you on tape discussing the poison. And now we have your co-conspirator's confession. You are not a victim. You are an accomplice." An officer grabbed Patricia's arms. She screamed as the cold steel touched her wrists. "No, Harrison. Help me, Harrison. Tell them I am your wife." I stood there watching them. I watched the people who had shared my table, lived in my house, and planned my death. I saw them for what they truly were. Not family. Just strangers who had stayed too long. Patricia looked at me, her eyes pleading, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. "Harrison, please. Don't let them take me. I love you." I looked at her. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel sadness. I felt the cool detachment of an architect looking at a building that had been condemned and was finally being demolished to make way for something new. I reached up and adjusted my vest, tightening the knot of my tie. "You don't love me, Patricia," I said calmly. "You loved the lifestyle I provided. And now that the bill has come due, you are just upset that you have to pay it." "Harrison," she wailed as they dragged her toward the holding cells, the same cells I had just vacated. Jason didn't say a word. As he was led past me, he looked up. Our eyes met one last time. There was no defiance left in him, only the hollow look of a man who realized he had played a game against a grandmaster and lost every piece on the board. I watched them disappear down the hallway. The heavy steel door clanged shut behind them. The noise signaled the end of the empire they thought they had built. The precinct returned to its normal hum. Phones rang. Officers typed reports. Life went on. Sarah walked over to me. She looked exhausted, but relieved. "It is over, Harrison. They are gone." I nodded slowly. "Not just gone, Sarah. Erased." I turned to Agent Miller. "Thank you, Agent. I assume you have everything you need." Miller nodded, pocketing his notepad. We do. The testimony regarding the wire fraud will be needed next week, but for tonight you are free to go, and Mr. Vance, yes, good work. I have seen a lot of takedowns, but I have never seen anyone dismantle their own life so precisely to catch the bad guys. I looked at the empty desk where Jason had tried to sign my life away. Sometimes, Agent, you have to tear the house down to get rid of the termites. I turned and walked toward the exit. The automatic doors slid open, and the cool night air hit my face. It smelled of rain and ozone. It smelled clean. I stepped out onto the sidewalk. The city lights of Boston twinkled in the distance, a skyline I had helped create. I was 72 years old. I had lost my company. I had lost my wife. I had lost a fortune in the process. But as I stood there waiting for Sarah to bring the car around, I realized I was richer than I had been in years. I had my mind. I had my dignity. And most importantly, somewhere safe, I had my daughter. The collapse was total. The dust was settling. And now, finally, I could begin the reconstruction. The sound of graphite scratching against paper is the only music I need these days. It is a sharp, precise sound. For 40 years, I used this sound to raise skyscrapers that scraped the belly of the clouds in Boston. But the blueprint in front of me today isn't for a tower of glass and steel. It is for something much more important. It is a treehouse. A small, sturdy fortress to be built in the branches of the old oak tree in my backyard. It has reinforced walls, a secret hatch, and a view of the lake. It is a safe place. I look up from my drafting table and gaze out the French doors. The autumn leaves have turned to gold and crimson, painting the world in warm hues that contrast with the cold gray of the past 6 months. In the garden, sitting on a blanket, is Emily. She is not the hollow, terrified woman I dragged out of a locked bedroom. She is laughing. She is holding Leo, my grandson, lifting him up toward the sky. Leo is 3 months old. He has his mother's eyes and my stubborn chin. He is healthy, loud, and blissfully unaware that his father is currently sitting in a federal holding cell awaiting sentencing. Emily is healing. It hasn't been a straight line. There are days when she flinches at loud noises. There are days when she calls me 3 times an hour, just to make sure I am real, to make sure her memory isn't playing tricks on her. The gaslighting Jason subjected her to left deep cracks in her foundation, but we are filling them in with truth and therapy. She is seeing a trauma specialist twice a week, and she has taken over as the interim CEO of the new company I formed. I cleared the debts. I liquidated the toxic assets. I gave her a clean slate. She is tough. She is a Vance. But before I could fully settle into this new season of peace, there was one loose end I had to tie off. One final inspection of the wreckage. Yesterday, I drove to the Federal Correctional Institution in Danbury. It is a low-security facility, but it is still a cage. The visiting room smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. I sat on a metal stool separated from the inmate side by a thick sheet of plexiglass. When the guard brought Patricia in, I barely recognized her. The woman who used to spend thousands on serums and treatments to look 40 was gone. In her place was a woman who looked every minute of her 60 years, and then some. Her hair, once dyed a rich, vibrant chestnut, was now dull and streaked with aggressive gray roots. Her skin was sallow. She had lost weight, her prison uniform hanging off her frame like a sack. She sat down. She didn't look at me with the haughty arrogance she used to have. She didn't have that manipulative glint in her eye. She looked shattered. She picked up the phone on her side of the glass. Her hand was trembling. "Harrison," she whispered. Her voice was raspy, broken. I picked up my phone, but I didn't say anything. I just watched her. "I am so sorry," she cried, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Please, you have to believe me." I was scared. Jason threatened me. He said he would hurt me if I didn't go along with it. "I never wanted to hurt you. I miss you. I miss our home." I listened to her beg. I listened to her try to rewrite history, trying to cast herself as a victim one last time. She talked about the good times we had, the trips to Europe, the dinners. She tried to find a hook, a crack in my armor that she could wiggle her finger into. "Please, Harrison," she sobbed, pressing her palm against the glass. "Can you speak to the judge? Can you tell them I was coerced? If you help me, I can get a reduced sentence. I will sign anything. I just want to come home." I let the silence stretch. I let her hear the hum of the fluorescent lights and the echo of her own desperation. "Patricia," I said finally. My voice was calm. It wasn't the voice of a husband. It was the voice of a judge. "You are not listening to yourself. You are still trying to negotiate a deal. You still think this is a transaction." I leaned forward. "I spent my entire life building structures," I told her. "I know that a building is only as strong as its materials. I thought you were marble. I thought you were steel. I thought you were the structure that held my life together." I paused, watching the hope fade from her eyes. "But you were just drywall, Patricia. You were just paint. You were decoration covering up rot." "Harrison, please," she whimpered. "We were family." "That is where you are wrong," I said, delivering the final blow. "You made a classification error. You thought that because you wore my ring and lived in my house, you were the owner. But you weren't." I stood up. "You were just a tenant, Patricia, and you violated the lease." I hung up the phone. I didn't wait for her response. I didn't watch her crumble. I turned my back on the woman who had tried to erase my mind, and I walked out of the prison. The heavy steel doors clanged shut behind me, sealing her in the past. Now sitting in my study watching Emily play with Leo, I feel a sense of lightness I haven't felt in years. The house is quiet. The poison is gone. The parasites have been evicted. I pick up my pencil and go back to the drawing. I need to make sure the railing on the treehouse is high enough. I need to make sure the ladder is secure. The sun is setting now, casting long shadows across the lawn. I will have to turn on the lamp soon, but for a moment I just watch the light fade. They thought I was an old man at the end of his day. They thought the sun was setting on Harrison Vance. They didn't realize that I wasn't the sunset. I was the storm that comes before the clear morning. I close my sketchbook. I stand up and walk toward the door to join my daughter and grandson in the garden. The world is a cruel place. It is filled with people who will smile to your face while they mix poison in your drink. It is filled with people who see love as a weakness and loyalty as a tool. But they forgot the most important rule of nature. You do not corner a builder, because we know how to bring the roof down. And as long as there is breath in my lungs and blood in my veins, no one is ever going to touch the people I love again. My name is Harrison Vance. I am a father. I am a grandfather. And I am the wall that stands between my family and the wolves. If you have ever had to cut toxic people out of your life to save your sanity, let me know in the comments. It is a hard lesson to learn, but sometimes the family you build is stronger than the family you marry into. We often grow up believing that family is a sacred bond that can never be broken, no matter how much pain it causes us. But my story is a reminder that the title of wife, husband, or child is not a license to abuse. Real loyalty isn't about blind obedience. It is about mutual respect and protection. I learned that you cannot save someone who is actively trying to destroy you, even if you love them. Sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is lock the door, protect your peace, and let the toxic people face the consequences of their own actions alone. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps me share more stories of survival and justice. And tell me below, what was the moment you realized you had to stand up for yourself? I read every comment. Stay strong, stay safe, and never let anyone underestimate you. See you in the next video.